The first question is, why am I up here and why am I kind of well-suited to have this conversation? I've spent the last 15 years working with large enterprises, really thinking through how do you transition the technological advancements that are at the forefront of their organizations to really think about efficiency, effectiveness, and how does it actually drive business value for your organization. Very similar to maybe my oldest daughter's birth. I remember where I was in November of 2022, which is when ChatGPT was released. At that point in time, what happened is that for everyone out there that heard about AI, it made it real for every person. The fact that you can type something in natural language and have it create something out of thin air was pretty powerful. And you fast forward now a few years, it is obviously getting more complex. The wave of innovation is moving very fast. And then what the opportunity presents for all of us, hopefully in this room, is how do we really think about how we can apply that to our organizations in a thoughtful way, in a way that's actually going to drive measurable impact. And for me personally, this is my own personal vendetta, is how do you do this in a way that's human-centric, not just about automating people out of jobs. So we'll see what the future holds. I might be an optimist in that regard, but we'll see where it goes. So we're going to go on a journey today, really two parts that we'll focus on. First is, where are we today, and what does this look like in the world of AI that's moving incredibly fast? The second piece that we'll dive into in more detail is really about that framework. It's about organizations are starting to connect the dots and really move the equation around how should they invest and employ a coherent AI program. So when I talk about coherent AI program, the two dimensions that typically fall into place are build versus buy. You can have massive teams of engineers that are very highly capable, focused on a small set of problems. And ultimately what happens as you move forward, typically you have all these ideas and use cases that maybe fall down the priority list. Well, at Unframe, we're helping organizations find the balance between those two things, focus on their key priorities, and also deliver the places that can have operational leverage, especially within the real estate industry itself. So it is no doubt that AI is funded, so boards, executives, LPs, it's out there and everyone's trying to figure out what and why to do with it. I think this is really important for us to acknowledge that this is not going away. What we think about at Unframe and what we're seeing from the market itself is that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, especially within the real estate organizations, commercial real estate, especially where we've seen a lot of early traction at Unframe. It really starts thinking about the massive amounts of data, the number of disjointed and fragmented systems, the high quality, expensive expertise that's required oftentimes to keep track of the market signals. All those are ripe to benefit from what is this transition to what organizations and people are calling AI native. So show of hands, could anyone rattle off a definition of AI native if I were to ask you? What does it mean? Does anyone have a good hypothesis? I'm not going to put you on the spot.
You're deploying models within your own environment and writing the prompting and structure, the orchestration yourself.
Very close. We're going to go deeper into exploring that together over the next 15 minutes or so. What's really fascinating, and I mentioned ChatGPT when it was kind of in November 2023, what was really fascinating about that point is that there's an explosion of use cases that, again, all of us can start connecting and relaying, like how could this impact my personal life, my personal productivity, as well as the organizations that we sit within. And on this chart really fast, on the steep slope is all the ideas that probably you, your teammates, the business units have within your organization, which is awesome, right? You have innovation, you have new ways of thinking things. What we also find, those are typically stuck within legacy silos of how organizations have operated in the past. So are those actually the right problems to go solve for the organization? Maybe, maybe not. We'll talk more about that. The center line here is what you think about of like the tool sprawl. So with all these great ideas, with all of the ability to go build software faster than has ever been possible in the history of mankind, this means there's a proliferation of tools, tool sprawls, and oftentimes that falls within co-pilots, right? Well, that's ChatGPT, Anthropic Cowork. There's a lot of them that are out there. Ultimately, what we see is that there's a ton of experimentation, but somehow the bottom line on the ROI, the connection to true value or NOI within your organizations has not linearly gone with the amount of AI deployments into your business. This is not all encompassing, right? I think some organizations get it right, and then depending on where you're on that maturity curve, a lot of these things can be accurate and true. Head nods, we track in, we kind of see in tool sprawl being a very real problem that we're trying to navigate. Then also, how do we cut through the noise, right? How do we know it's real? Cool. Let's keep going. So I'll take my stab at actually defining what AI native means. First and foremost, it is not a tool, a project, or anything like that within your actual ecosystem itself, right? So what AI native actually means is the ability to reason, analyze, decision make, either with human in the loop or autonomously in ways that previously were not possible. So if you think about the shift that we're undergoing right now, it's coming from a place of systems of record. So think your PMS, your CRM, your ERPs, whether you have one system or multiple systems, those are systems of record. It requires me, you, anyone else in your team to physically go hit a button to transact, or maybe you have some logic that's built into automations. With me on the sales side, we do a lot within Salesforce. As we transition to what AI native means, it's ability to have the actual shift from system of record to system of intelligence. So the ability to analyze the data, to identify risks, to recommend actions to go take or take those autonomously, that shift is huge. Because if you think about an example, just specifically within the real estate industry, that's where you start thinking about a portfolio manager, for example. Historically, they'd have to go download a bunch of Excel files into Excel sheets. They'd do the modeling, crunch a bunch of numbers, send it up through review for the board. In a week, in a couple weeks, you might have an answer back for the portfolio analysis. Well, within AI native, you take that, you flip that paradigm on its head. So instead of it taking a couple days or a couple weeks, what you're talking about is the ability for AI to go reason on the data, so abstracting information from the leases themselves, and then actually doing the modeling on its own, and then recommending that decision to the portfolio manager. That happens in seconds or minutes. And so when you really start thinking about what does AI native mean for an organization, that's one workflow embedded into the business. And so the way that I think about AI native, it's where is AI integrated within your business and workflows that's going to have the biggest leverage for your business, your unique expertise to help scale up to the market. What do you think? Tracking? Think this is easy? Yeah, I don't think so either. So we'll talk more about that. Before we get into that, I think this is really important to also call out here. While we define what AI native actually is, what's fascinating is that there are some themes that we're seeing through our customers and where Unframe specifically is helping them, where they get this right. So first and foremost, it's the shared enterprise context. In order to make AI work, you need the context of your organization and of your people. There's no LLM on earth that has as much information about your business as your systems or your people. So that's first and foremost. The second piece is once you actually have that context about your business, it has to be explainable, it has to be audible. You cannot have a black box, especially when you're thinking about the types of use cases that need to be either deterministic or probabilistic on how the outcomes need to drive. And then third piece is enterprise governance layer. And this is generally where we see most projects stall, is the fact they don't have a clear idea around security, policy, any sort of guardrails that tend to get in the way of actual rapid deployment into more use cases. So if you knock out all three of those, you should be in a pretty good spot. But again, not easy at all. So we'll talk about how do we actually prioritize it and get there. Well, I mentioned this just a couple minutes ago, just around like where AI projects tend to fall, and we definitely see this on a varying kind of dimension within types of customers that we're speaking with and chatting with and partnering with. First of all, like we talked about, the AI demand is crazy, and there's a lot of noise both from users, business users, AI technologists, as well as people trying to sort out what does it all mean for them and what does the strategy look like. And I have AI output on the right side of the dotted line. That you could probably translate that into impact into the organization. Like depending on, again, your maturity and what you're comfortable with, that varies greatly. But I'm not going to go through all of them on the left, but there are three that I think are really important to call out that will then frame the prioritization piece of where you should even start when you think about their transition to AI native. First, it is the misalignment between business and technical users. So see this a lot. It has, again, never been easier to develop technology. The hard part is still having problem definition with the business stakeholders and with the technical stakeholders, so you're solving the right problem. And so if you can start there and just getting the same people in the room, talking the same language, understanding what's important to them, their business, and the prioritization of where they want to go in the long term, usually that gets you a long ways down the road that people skip. The second one is around ownership confusion. So whether you decide to build your own solution or maybe you buy something off the shelf, managing this stuff is not easy. You have hallucination, you have model drift, you'll have integrations if you're buying things off the shelf. Again, all this has to be plugged into your own context, your own governance layer, and those things break, it gets messy, very hard, and it really becomes a tax into the organization for how you're managing it. So that's the third piece around talent diverted to non-differentiating effort and work. we'll talk about this next, of like where and why do we start. But it really comes down to, if you're spending all your time integrating your back-end systems and doing all the plumbing in order to get these point solutions stood up because of the AI sprawl within your organization, you're probably, again, not attaching that to value as fast as you could be or should be. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the second goal I had, helping you walk away with hopefully something you can take and use within your organization. And spoiler alert, you might be embarrassed with how simple this really is. First and foremost, you have, where do you actually start? On this graph, we have a 2x2. The x-axis is differentiated potential, low to high, very simple. The y-axis is time to value, slow to fast. What we see over and over again, without the right effort of the business and technical alignment out of the gates, what we find is that most of the time is actually, I got my pointer on going, is spent in the low differentiation with low time to value. So that's a resource suck within your organization that, one, you should try and avoid at all costs. Historically, the next piece would be, okay, great. We don't want to spend the things that are going to take a long time to get us there. We obviously want to move fast. But if we move fast, the only option has been to buy. Well, what are the trade-offs for buy? You're not going to have context organization, especially in large, complex organizations with messy data. You're ultimately, oftentimes going to fail on the context side, which drives user adoption and impact the organization. Again, keeping that ROI line we talked about at the front of the, on the front of this, lower than it should be. And then on the right side, where most organizations are spending on the build, this is still definitely where we see organizations differentiating. So you as your firm, what is your unique differentiation that you can bring to market that you should invest IP and R&D to go solve? The third option that really until Unframe, and why I'm excited to be here today in front of all of you, is that we can, again, actually blend the speed of a buy with the tailoring of the build in a way that is allowing folks to really focus on what is going to be the core pieces of their business going to move the business forward fastest without having to sacrifice wasted resource. And when we do this correctly and over time, it creates a unified AI program where you're using shared context, whether that's a build, whether it's using something like Unframe or connecting to those purchase solutions that you're buying off the shelf, that shared knowledge and also the shared governance. And the shared governance is really important because ultimately, this is going to be the piece that allows you to create those Lego blocks that allow you to move faster than otherwise possible. One example, as we think about this, is one of our clients we have a chance to partner with is Cushman and Wakefield. They came to us initially for a pretty simple lease abstraction use case, not unusual within this world, obviously. One of the things that they consistently challenged with is that they had tens of thousands of pages, they had handwritten notes within the margin of their documents, and this was a completely manual process. So it was error-prone, data inconsistencies, they would miss complete clauses of the leases, lots of issues that they were running into. And then the bigger piece that they saw is that this was data or expertise extensive. So the data that they had in the process of running was relying on few people within their within their organization that they thought was an actual risk. And so when they turned to Unframe, they had spent about a year going into evaluating different solutions. They looked at 50 different providers. And one of the things that they continued to fall short on is accuracy for the brokers to drive adoption. And once we got in and understanding their use case, what ultimately ended up happening is that we met their accuracy threshold of 98 or 96%. Excuse me, I need some water, I think. 96%. And ultimately what ended up happening is that they were able to see the progress within that one use case and build on that context and foundation of governance that allowed them to scale quickly in less than 9 months into 14 other use cases in their business. So when we talk about definition of AI native, it was going into integrated workflows into the business that otherwise was not possible. They've expanded portfolio insights, valuations, tour books, and a bunch of other operational workflows. Cool. Well, this is not easy for sure, and we're going through this in 15 minutes. I want to leave you all with a couple things. The first, the big shifts that have to happen is that moving from a pilot culture to actually thinking about the operating model itself. So the business and tech alignment that is required in order to actually make this happen does oftentimes come from the top. So you want to have it really drive the incubation and the internal of your organization to foster up the right opportunities and right opportunities to innovate. But then you do need to have a prioritization checklist to make sure you're focusing on the right things first. That goes in that prioritization discipline, and then owning outcomes and not experiments. And I think this is really important because oftentimes we can get into this conversation around build versus buy, but the real conversation has to be out of what's going to move the needle for our business. What is that unique expertise that we can scale? So as you leave this conversation and this session, I hope there's a couple things to think through. Like one, if you feel like you're stuck, and stuck meaning maybe you think you should be moving faster than you've been able to realize results on your AI strategy, ask what truly differentiates your company? What's the secret sauce? Because you all have it. You've been in business for a long time, for most of you. Two, where can AI scale your expertise? So I think this is a really important shift and paradigm shift is like it's scaling expertise, not replacing expertise. And then three, what's sitting in that backlog or a problem that you think is a high priority to go solve in your business, but for whatever reason you haven't been able to chance to get the resources, the people, or expertise internally in order to go solve that problem. Those are all areas where us at Unframe are partnering with organizations and clients to sort through the messiness of their data and again shift to driving something that's going to drive production-ready results in a matter of days, not months or years, which is the traditional payoff. So I'm joined by a couple of my teammates, Gabriel as well as Alyssa. We're at booth 109. If you find yourself thinking that you are moving slower than you think you could be as an organization in pursuit of this vision of AI native, and you think that's an important thing for you and your business, we'd love to have the conversation. All we do is we want to land on the right use case. We want to really understand and what does that look like to go production ready. So again, we're not trying to do experiments or pilots. We're trying to get to production ready, make sure it's hardened with security at the core of everything we do. And then only when you're happy. So whatever success metrics we partner with you to define and describe, those are what we create as our North Star. And only then do you actually subscribe and pay for a subscription with Unframe. So we're still very early innings. So if you find yourself feeling behind, good news is you have time to catch up. The bad news is maybe not. We're moving fast. So appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully you took something away from this conversation, and I'd love to answer any questions the last couple of minutes we have here. Yep.
So one of the main concepts of what you're talking about being AI native is to really rethink the process and not necessarily automate the existing way of doing things.
Yep.
So that requires a lot of throwing out your 30 years of experience of how you did something to think kind of in first principles. So what advice do you have for organizations to really do that in an effective way?
I think there's a difference between throwing out experience and expertise and throwing out process. There's a difference in that, right? Yeah. So I think the first place, and you just mentioned first principles, what is the real problem that we're trying to solve? Like, is it a client-facing issue? Is there a metric that we can attach to the client-facing issue? And what are ways that we can brainstorm and bring ideas together of how we can solve that problem differently than maybe we've done it in the past? I think more than anything else, this really comes down into that connection between the business and technical stakeholders, something that I had a chance to do at AWS, which is one of my previous employers. We do a working backwards process. So we would sit in a room for an hour, and 2 hours, 3 hours, a couple of day workshops oftentimes, and we really just define the problem. And it was oftentimes, the challenge was not that you could get the solutioning fast, you couldn't get the problem definition fast. And spending more time there is where I see most organizations that are getting this right do well. Any other questions? Here?
One of the barriers I think you had on the first or second slide was vendor lock-in. How does vendor selection for that whole AI model play into the decision-making process, whether that be being an enterprise contract for SOC 2 or what have you?
Yeah, so a big piece of this, and different models have different values for what they're trying to achieve. And so to get locked into OpenAI or name one that's out there, depending on that use case, is probably not a good idea. So the more flexibility that you build into the architecture and the scaling, it means a couple things. One, you can oftentimes make sure that your cost isn't scaling exponentially faster than your actual use case or value deriving from it. And then secondarily, if you're trying to use a general purpose large language model, oftentimes you don't even need to be trained in using that type of model depending on that use case. If you can use smaller, more cost-effective models down that are either part of OpenAI or another solution, doesn't matter, just using that as an example.